I want to be as real as we can with this, Holly, because
Okay.
if we're to pull back the curtain, you and I don't necessarily deep dive into our guest's life because we want to ask questions that are authentic because we really don't know what the answers are.
Yeah, exactly. And we never know where our conversation will go.
So I've heard bits and pieces of our guest this week and Jenny's story, but I didn't want to. As soon as I heard bits and pieces, I'm like, oh, it's kind of like that spoiler alert where I'm like, I need to read more and find out more, but I refrain from doing so.
And I'm a little concerned that I might get emotional during this episode, just on the little Cole's notes that I have seen about
No.
Jenny's life. So, guys, I'm excited for this conversation.
Jenny Leavitt, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
There's so many avenues in which I feel like we can go through your life and kind of maneuver around some of the things that you've been through. But I think always starting at the beginning is the best way to start a conversation because you know a little about us, just like we know a little about you. So Jenny, who are you and where did you come from?
Well, my name is Jenny Leavitt, and I live down in Florida. Was raised here in Florida. Um, Probably one of the biggest events in my life was when I was just 22. I had already been married for a few years and had a couple of kids and found out that I had stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Hmm.
Didn't know at the time that I didn't have very long to live, and or at least that was the prognosis. And also did not know at the time that a lot of those lessons that I was going to learn in that season of my life were going to come back over and over and over again in all the different things that my husband and I and our family would go through.
Hmm.
22, married. Was faith a part of your life before that?
Yeah, my husband and I were both, we were not raised in Christian homes. I tell people that I guess what you would call us is like first generation born again Christians.
Sure.
Okay.
But we both got saved really young, and my husband was in the military and got saved overseas in Scotland when he was stationed over there. And um, neither one of us really got saved knowing anything about salvation. Thank God, God brought us into a wonderful church family where we could get mentored and discipled and, you know, really grounded and rooted. And that's another piece that I didn't realize was going to be so crucial, not just going through the cancer, but through everything else that our family went through. You know, over the years, I'm sure we're going to dive a little deeper into all that, but we've gone through a lot of mess over the years. And I think if we didn't have that foundation of faith from
No.
early on, I don't know. I don't know how we would have done it. Like even with the cancer, I remember when I had to get I did 6 months of chemo and then 56 radiation treatments and multiple surgeries. And in the middle of the radiation treatments, I had to go to Gainesville, Florida, which was about an hour and a half away from where I lived at the time. And I had to basically live there for about 5 weeks because
Hmm.
I had to have radiation morning and then wait 6 hours and have it in the afternoon as well. And I remember thinking to myself, so I would have been probably about 21 years old, looking around and seeing people that were railing at God, mad at God. You know,
Mm.
I know you guys talk about the why me, a lot of them, why me? Why I've been a good person. Why I just don't understand this. And I remember looking around and thinking, I don't know how people are going through this stuff without Jesus. Like he is, he was, there was times that it was only his strength that I could actually get up and go get in the little shuttle that would take me back for my next radiation treatment, because it just wiped me out. At the end of that year, when they declared me in remission, I remember my husband's name is Myron, and I remember telling Myron, um, honey, if it comes back, I can't go through that again. That was
Hmm.
that was horrible. I just can't go through that again. And he was like, yes, you will, because you love me, you love the boys, you would fight. Which
Yeah.
thank God I've been in remission ever since then. I've had lots and lots of issues, um, health related, but they're all related to the radiation and the chemo.
Yeah.
Long-term effects of that. The actual cancer, I've been in cancer-free since November of 1998.
Amazing.
So,
I mean, you were so young, and then you get this essential, like, terminal diagnosis. Like, this is
mhm.
it. And I'm sure you and your husband had so many hopes and dreams. How did that shift your perspective of the future in that season?
I think anybody that's faced with the reality of their own death, I think it's going to shape the way you move forward. Like, it just made me so much more grateful for life, for all the opportunities. I've always been the kind of woman who would rather make memories versus like nice jewelry or, any of that stuff. But that just like solidified it that when the boys were growing up, we have two boys. When they were growing up, one of our favorite things to do for Christmas, instead of a bunch of gifts, was like annual passes to the theme parks. We lived in Orlando. We lived near
Yeah,
Orlando, so
Yeah, might as well.
Um,
makes sense.
but I look back now, especially kind of a little spoiler about the accident that happened in 2015. And I look back now, and some of the cherished memories I have before then were those same trips that we took and the memories that we made, things that you can't take that away. I'll always have those memories. So it definitely gave me a renewed sense of purpose in life, and that's actually one of the ways that we saw God work good out of even something as bad as cancer.
Yeah.
Over the years, I can't tell you how many people would come to me or my husband and say, hey, my mom was just diagnosed with cancer. Can you talk to her? Or my coworker just found out that she's got cancer, and just being able to come alongside people the way people did for us. That was definitely one of the ways that good came out of it, and that our lives kind of shifted from what we thought our life would be.
When you hear the word cancer, it's already, ugh. And then you hear stage 4 and you're told that it's terminal. Did you automatically assume that that was it? This is it. I'm done. Or was there that fight and you like, no, I'm going to prove that they're wrong?
A little both, to be honest with you.
Sure.
There was there were so many months when they misdiagnosed me, which is actually pretty common, especially when you're young like that. And not only was I really young, but the only history of any cancer that we knew of at the time was my dad's side of the family had some prostate cancer, but that's it. Like,
Yeah.
so this was totally unheard of in our family. So they weren't even looking for cancer. So there were so many months of the not knowing, that finally knowing, it was almost like, okay, now I have a target that I can hit, something that I can target in prayer. We know how to attack this with medical treatments. Like,
Hmm.
so there's that aspect of it. But then there was the other aspect, that of the unknown. And my biggest mind battle at the time was our boys. Jacob was 3 months old when I
Hmm.
was diagnosed.
Wow.
And Caleb wasn't even quite 3. I think he had just turned 3. So I mean, they were little, and that was my biggest mind battle is my boys. Like, what would happen? God, I know that I'm right with you. I settled that with you. I know that I'm right with you. So if you call me home, I know where I'm going. But my boys, what? How is Myron going to be a single dad to a baby, a 3-month
Hmm.
old baby, and a 3-year-old?
Hmm.
And I remember one night going out in the living room, and I was about middle of the night, couldn't sleep. And I was like, God, I am not getting up until you give me some peace about this. I can't keep battling the fatigue and everything from the treatments and these mind battles. I just can't. And I don't know, maybe an hour and a half, I don't know how long it was, that I was just wrestling with God about that. And he gave me such a peace that night. And it was like, you hear people say that God spoke to them, and if you're a believer, you know, it's not like somebody's actually in the room, but it was undeniably, he spoke to me and just said, they were yours. They were mine before they were yours. I love them. I'm going to take care of them, whether I call you home or not. And such a peace is that peace that passes all understanding that you can't describe to somebody. They have to experience it. That peace came on me. That was another learning lesson that I didn't realize was going to be a learning lesson until much later. The night of the accident in 2015, that very same conversation with God came back to me. But that peace stayed with me so much that even when the boys were growing up, there's probably things that I shouldn't have let them do, but I was okay with it. You know, I was like, God, they're yours. He just totally, helped me settle that. So both ways to answer your question.
So despite having this faith, is there still the anxiety and the worry when it comes to doctor's appointments and like, will this come back? Is this going to be something that I'm going to have to deal with? Despite the fact that we're looking at 1998 and we're in 2023, do you still get that seed of doubt, that seed of worry?
Oh, that's such a good question, because that has evolved a little bit over time too. Early on, I don't know, I'd say probably maybe the first 5 or 10 years, it was that seed of doubt of what if it comes back? What if it comes back? You know, every little thing they would want to send me for more testing, like things that a normal person, it would just be like, nah, we'll check it next year when you come in. No, they would send me for a whole barrage of tests. But then I don't know, somewhere in the last 10 years or so, it became the anxiety like shifted to more of the dread that every little thing is going to send me for that barrage of testing, and it just probably around, I think it was around 2013 is when I have had at least one surgery a year since then, sometimes 2 or 3. And it's like my thyroid was the first to go. That was precancerous. And they said they could almost conclusively say it's from the radiation. It's one of the first things to go. And I was radiated from my jaw down to my pelvis. So that was one of the first things to go. And then it's just been like one thing after another after another. Jacob, our 17-year-old son, well, he was 17 in 2015. He asked me in 2014, he said, Mom, I just don't understand. Why would they have treated the cancer that you had with something that they know causes cancer or causes problems? And I said, son, I had a 25% chance of living. So at that point, they were just doing whatever they could, and I'm alive. So sometimes you have to take the bad with the good, and I'm alive. All these years later, I'm alive. So sometimes I still have to like remind myself of that and preach to myself that when I get that anxiety, to be completely honest with you, I've got some health issues going on right now with my abdomen that are due to radiation scarring. And, they're saying it's like spider webs down in my abdomen from the radiation. And I get frustrated just like anybody else would, but it's just one of those things. You just got to deal with it one issue at a time. And I have to keep going to God about it and keep asking for help to get through it. So
you mentally are so tough, and that's one of the I think incredible things about those who battle any kind of health situation is like, yeah, you're physically battling, but so much of it also is in your mind, and it can be exhausting. For you, with the mental battle to choose God, to choose a healthy, positive perspective, what were some of the things that you leaned into during those rough days to keep choosing God and positivity as best you could?
yeah, some of those very same choices are ones that I found myself over and over in the years coming back to too. And earlier when I talked about being able to come alongside people that were going through cancer, some of the very same, I call them like my toolbox, the things that I turn to when it's like, okay, I don't always, I would like to say that I'm always on point. I always, go straight for the toolbox. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you just have a really bad day, bad couple days, and then it's like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? I know better than this. So one of the go-to, and I know it seems so simple and people might think it's cliche, but is scripture.
Uh,
When I was going through cancer, one of the biggest things that helped me mentally, little scraps of paper, and our kids were really little. So sometimes it would be a sticky note or a piece of construction paper or whatever. But by the bathroom mirror. So when I was nauseous, it would be a little reminder that, no matter what I'm going through, that he has not left me, he's not forsaken me. Or, when I'm laying in my bed because I'm just miserable and can't get up, a verse over by the light switch reminding me that somehow he's going to work this all for our good, for the people that love him. Just those little things. And I would put them in places where I would actually see them. And I still do that all these years later. I have one sitting right here on my computer. Um, so that was a really, really big one. Having trusted people that I know, I can talk to, and I know that they love me, but they're also going to speak the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's crucial for me as well. Journaling has always really been big for me too. And sometimes it's like just journaling prayers. Sometimes it's actually working through some things. Music is a really big one for me. I love music, love it. And I can't tell you how many songs have played at just the right time,
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, oh, and
yeah.
maybe it's a song I've heard 50 times, but you don't pay attention to the words. And then
Yeah.
that one time you're driving down the road and you're really having a miserable time, or you're really wrestling through some things, and that song comes on, and all of a sudden you pay attention to the words that time. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
thank you, God. I needed that reminder.
Yeah.
So those are
There-
just some of the ones out of my toolbox I can think of right now.
Nice.
I love the analogy of the toolbox, because every time we go through things, we get to add another tool to that box. And
Yep.
you deal with cancer, and you're dealing with, being a mom of young growing boys, but sometimes there's tools that you even wish that you didn't have, and that you wish that you didn't have to put them in the toolbox. And I'm talking about, you had alluded to it as well, and that was in 2015. A new tool that you had to add to the toolbox. If you could tell the story of that day and kind of what led up to it.
Yep. So my husband and I were in the ministry. We had been up at the church. It was a Saturday, and all four of us, my husband and I, and our two sons. So at that time, Caleb, our oldest, was 20, and Jacob, our youngest, was 17. And we had been up at the church all day. We had a special, like, kind of like a rock opera that our church had put on. And so we know when you're volunteers, you're the first ones there, you're the last ones to
Yep.
leave.
Yeah.
And so, it was really late, like midnight late. And my husband and I had just gotten home. We lived about 25 minutes or so from the church. And our boys had driven together in Caleb, our oldest. He had a Ford Escape at the time. And to make a long story short, they were T-boned by a drunk driver.
Mhm.
And our 17-year-old Jacob died on the scene, and then Caleb almost died. It was really touch and go for about 2 weeks there. And I literally have to start at the top of his head and just kind of work my way down to remember. He had a traumatic brain injury, he broke his neck, um, fractured every bone in his face, blew out both of his eardrums,
Mhm.
uh, cut one of his his veins. I don't think it was a jugular, but cut one of them. Broke three ribs. Broke his pelvis in three spots. Broke his feet. Like there was just it was really really bad. And so one of the things that I alluded to earlier, that when I had cancer and I was really wrestling with God about trusting him with the boys and what would happen the night of the accident, before we knew for sure that it was them, Myron had received a call, so he had gone on to the accident scene. If you have ever experienced a traumatic, shocking event like that, there's so much confusion.
Mm.
And then you're in shock too. So he had seen Jacob on the roadway covered in a sheet, thought it was Jacob, but the officers on the scene had said, no, 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 your son's on the way to the hospital. That's not your son. And there was just so much confusion. So I didn't know any of that. I'm back at home, pacing back and forth, praying, trying to get a hold of the police department. And anyway, it's just a mess. And I still remember pacing back and forth, going and standing by the dining room table. And I said, God, okay, that's enough. That's enough. You told me all those years ago that the boys were yours and that you loved them more than you loved me. So I still believe that that's the case. And no matter what happened, I am still choosing to trust you, that you love them and that they're yours. And I didn't even know at that time that Jacob had already passed away. But God knew, and God knew that I needed to remember that reference point. I needed to pull that out and hold on to that they were his. Because in the next 3 to 4 days, there was a lot of mental, as you can imagine. I mean, really, it went on past that. But for the first 3 or 4 days, it was horrible because Myron and I weren't raised in Christian homes, but our boys were. And when you've been raised in Christian homes and your parents are in ministry, like there's even jokes about preachers' kids and so we knew that there is always that potential that they can walk it, talk it, but not really believe it and not really know Jesus personally for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I just needed that real assurance that God, I just need to know that he's right with you. So those first few days especially were horrible. And that was with God reminding me, you told me you trusted me. I told you they're mine. And if I can take just a second longer to tell you what finally broke that, on the fourth day, I couldn't sleep, got up. I had already cleaned the kitchen, taken a walk, and was back in the house by 6 o'clock in the morning. Like it was one of those nights.
Yeah.
And I was in the boys' bedroom, and some folks from the church had offered to help set up his memorial at the church. And so they had already said, if you want to go ahead and just get together anything you want to put on the tables, we'll come by and we'll get it. And they were awesome. Again, church community. It's just part of the toolbox. And so I was looking through his stuff, and Jacob was very artsy. He was he could paint, he could draw, he could leather tool, he could wood burn. He was really good, but he wasn't a writer. And so when I saw this poem, I thought for sure it was just like something for school. So I just put it aside, and something nudged me, no, pay attention to that. So I turned the page, and Jacob loved his name. So he had like signed it with a flourish, and then put Jacob Leavitt, February 2015. So that made me read it. And the whole poem, it was called Holding Me. The whole poem was about him being a sinful man. He knows what he's like on the inside. He knows he's not worthy of God's forgiveness, but then he comes to realize how much God loves him, and he accepts him in his life. The last 2 verses are about him going to the heavenly city, dancing on the streets of gold, and meeting his Savior face to face.
Wow.
And he had signed and dated it February of 2015, so just 6 months before. And it's like God was reminding me, see, I told you, they're mine. I took care of them. 6 months beforehand, I made sure that he was ready.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how God can leave those clues and just speak to us in so many different ways.
Yeah.
I just honestly can't imagine, like, what you lived is one of my greatest fears. And so your words of encouragement are, I think will help a lot of parents when you have kids and you love them so much and you're like, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be okay? Now, I mean, like you and your husband are like in two places, grieving the loss of one, and supporting the other one.
Mm.
Caleb is fighting for his life. How were you able to navigate that?
Well, we leaned on a lot of the toolbox things that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Our church community, we are blessed to be part of a worldwide fellowship of churches, and we literally had churches of people that we know from China and India, like sending us cards,
Oh,
sending us money, like practical things. We had local churches that we would come home from the hospital and they cleaned our house and freshened our sheets because we had family coming in from out of town. Things like that, that our minds were so foggy and so like not even thinking about that stuff. They set up the rental cars for us. They got people from the airport. They brought us food to the hospital. All those practical things. I truly don't know what we would have done. Like I really don't. I
mhm.
don't know what people in those situations without a supportive community do. I don't know. And the hospital that we were at, I hesitate to say this because their trauma unit was phenomenal. I mean, we've
Yeah.
written letters. Their trauma unit was just awesome. Uh, their interventions, I believe, were instrumental in Caleb surviving. But there were like their grief, there was no grief counseling. There was no, hey, here's some resources for you. There was none of that. A lot of the things that we've um, had to learn, we had to seek out on our own. We had to seek the help, or we had to look back on our own life. My husband's a pastor, so he's really good at kind of mining things for lessons that you learn anyway. So, one of the things he said over and over again is one of the things I haven't really touched on, and I won't go into it much, but there was a period of our lives when we went through a little homeless stretch too, because he was sent home on workman's comp from his job for an injury for a year and a half.
Mm.
And at that time, we had two cars, two houses, we lost it all. Um, just you can't survive when you're sent home like that on 40% of your pay. And so things like that he would say, God was faithful to us then. We never went hungry. We always had a roof over our head. It may have been a pay by the week hotel, but we always
Yeah.
had a roof over our head. And he was like, and when you went through cancer, God always provided. He always led us to the right resources. So leaning heavily on the lessons that we learned in our younger years, and then leaning heavily on the support that, thank God, we had in place. Like, I really don't know what we would have done without the support that we had in place. That's actually one reason why we have a great heart for other people that are going through similar situations, because we did have that. And it's still, we actually, back to one of your questions from earlier, Johnny, is that about us not being um, raised in the faith. When I mentioned that part, um, we had been Christians for quite some time, though, when the accident happened,
Yeah.
probably over 20 years. And we were good, solid Christians. We were in the ministry, and it still rocked us to the core. It will, something like that will challenge everything that you say you believe. And you have to really evaluate it. And do I really believe that I'm going to see Jacob again?
Yeah.
Why? Do I really believe that Christ did rise again, and that we're going to rise again, and that there really is a heaven? It will challenge everything that you believe. And that is with us having a good, solid foundation. So our heart really is to help other people, because we realize not everybody, we've met quite a few people that have experienced similar things that don't have that solid foundation. And a lot of them are really floundering. And we personally know at least one family that the family itself is fractured apart,
Mm.
which is sad. But that's one reason why we want our story to get out there, so that we can help people know there's nothing super fancy or special about us. We've just chosen to keep on keeping on one step at a time. And when we have those days that we realize, what am I doing here? Like, why am I letting myself think of this? When you get to that place, just go back to your toolbox, say, okay, you know, what can I do today that will help me get back where I need to be?
Yeah. Before we get to your why me moment, before we talk about God Prince, I do want to ask you this. Not that I want to highlight the driver, but
Yeah.
I mean, there's something also with forgiveness
Mm.
and what happened to the gentleman who hit your two boys?
Uh, so, um,
Or should I not ask that
no,
question?
no, no, you can. I'm just trying to make it shorter. So there was a witness. It was a dark, rainy night, and it was out in the country because we lived out in the country. So there weren't any streetlights. There was one witness about a mile away that said she thought that she saw that Caleb ran the red light, which fast forward, eventually that was completely dropped. The witness said she wasn't sure and everything. But anyway, that prolonged the whole proceeding for about a year while they investigated that. And the driver was 18. He
Mhm.
was drunk almost 3 times the legal limit in Florida. And I don't remember the exact speed, but Caleb, when they did the analysis of the intersection and the lights, I don't know how the investigators do all that, but Caleb was doing exactly the speed limit going through that intersection. The other driver was going about 30 or 35 miles per hour over the speed limit when he went through
Mhm.
there. So the investigators all believed that he was the one that was going through the wrong way. But because there was no way to conclusively prove it, the judge threw the book at him. But in the state of Florida, it was like 1 night in jail, 200 hours of community service, an anger management class. He lost his license for 6 months. I think there might have been like an anti-lock device on his car for a time, but it was his first offense, and they could not prove that he was the at fault. They could just prove that he was drunk while driving. So I will say that the forgiveness aspect was different for all three of us.
Yeah.
I had to really, it took me longer. Well, I know, no, I think probably out of the long of us was Caleb the longest. But we all three had to work through it in different ways. My husband blew my mind when he wanted to go talk to the 18-year-old boys. And when the other family's attorney, they were like, why? And he said, because I was 18 and I wasn't a Christian then, and I was doing stupid stuff like that too. And I want them to know that I've forgiven them.
Mm.
And the fathers of the two boys wouldn't let him actually talk to him, but they did talk to Myron. And Myron came home that day and he said, I don't know, I didn't get to talk to them, but I do feel better because I feel like I was obedient, that God wanted me to make that step. And so I do. I feel like I've forgiven them. Caleb's was more involved because Caleb and I both wound up doing some sessions with a grief counselor who specializes in that. And one of the things that she told him was, you have got to deal with the unforgiveness towards God and towards your dad and towards the other driver. And he was like, what? I'm not mad at God and I'm not mad at my dad. I'm mad at the other driver. And she was like, okay, Caleb. All right. I'll see you in the next session. So it's one of those things that as they started working through that, and he said he still remembers, he was up at the church by himself one time, and he was during the day for something. I think he was painting or something. And he went in the sanctuary and he said he was by himself. So he's just like yelling at God and just like venting and he said that he could tell God was listening, and at the end it was just that still quiet voice that was like, he said it wasn't in judgment or anything. It was like, are you done now? Are we
Mm.
okay? All right, can we move forward now?
Hmm.
And he said that something just broke, and that he didn't realize until a couple days later that he wasn't mad at the driver anymore. He wasn't mad at God anymore. And he didn't realize that he had been mad at his dad for some things, but he was, and he didn't realize that that was gone. So that
Yeah.
unforgiveness was tied to his anger and bitterness. And he said even people in the church and coworkers were like, "What is different about you?"
Hmm.
Because he had just, it broke in his life. That forgiveness is a huge piece, and it can cause all those things. It can cause even people around you to be like, don't talk to him. Obviously, I don't know, he's mad at something. Just don't talk to him.
Yeah, don't provoke.
So, hmm
Oh, wow.
yeah.
So we had mentioned it. You do have a book which is available now. We encourage you to get it. It's called God Prince. Why write that book?
Well, kind of what Holly was saying just a few minutes ago about how some of what I was sharing encourages her as a parent. I've always told people, like, don't take out the God factor when
Mm,
you're parenting. All of us are human, and we all have things we wish we could look back and have do-overs, and we can't. But just like me, finding that poem is a reminder that God is still working behind the scenes. Um, that was a big thing for me writing our story. If we're going to go, all three of us have said, and if we're going to go through something like this, um, we want the devil to get a black eye from this. We want him to be like, no, this is not for nothing.
Yeah.
God is going to use our testimony to help other people. And then the actual name of the book is, years ago, my husband preached a sermon on recognizing the footprints of Satan in your life, like when you could
mm,
see that he's messing around, in your life.
Yeah.
And I like to flip that idea on its head and say, what about those times when you just know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God just did something? God just orchestrated something. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's a scripture coming back to your mind when you needed it. Maybe it's that song on the radio that came at just the right time. Maybe it's like me finding that poem at exactly the morning that I needed to find it. Whatever that is, um, that is what I think of as a God print moment where his fingerprints are all over it. There's no denying that was him. And I think those times are when he gets the most glory too, because it's like undeniable that that was not something that I orchestrated. It wasn't something anybody orchestrated. That was purely him.
Yeah. I mean, the book, a great reflection on, those, like you said, the God prints. But
Yeah.
I mean, again, unfortunately, we don't learn these things without getting some scars along the way and getting our own bruises. And so, as being the Why Me project, going through all of those moments of your life, can you think of a significant Why Me moment?
Yes. Yes. Actually, the night of the accident, we were in the little room off the trauma unit in the emergency room, in the same conversation that the three state troopers came in to tell us. Well, first of all, the medical personnel had just come in, and they had just told us we have to take Caleb in for emergency exploratory surgery. They softened it, but basically they were saying, we're not sure if he's going to survive. We don't normally let parents go back, but we're going to let you
mm,
go back if you want to. And we had just come back into the room from seeing him. He literally had blood coming out, eyes, nose, mouth, ear, like everywhere. He was swollen, bruised. He looked horrible. And we had just come back in from that, and three state troopers walk in and tell us, first of all, that Caleb may be charged with vehicular manslaughter because of what the other witness said she thought she saw. So we need to be prepared for that. And then, right on the heels of that, they give us a baggie that has Jacob's class ring. He had just finished his second week of his senior year and had just gotten that class ring.
mm.
His class ring, the money that was in his pocket, um, and his bloody wallet. and it was all in this clear baggie that they just brought in. And so they lay these bombshells on us. He might be charged with vehicular manslaughter. Oh, and then your other son, we finally did find him. He's not at the hospital. He's in the morgue. That's why we didn't know where he was.
Oh my
So
goodness.
they lay this on us and they leave the room, and we're in this little tiny closet room that has a little two-seater love seat and a little table. And I turn into Myron and I said, Myron, I don't understand why. Why would God heal me from cancer in 1998 and then just so my heart can be ripped out, 17 years later? Why? I do not understand. Why would God do that to me? I just don't understand. And Myron was like, I don't know. I don't know. And that night, we never did get an answer to that. And I don't know, those first several months are still foggy. Like there's still lots of times when we'll be like, I don't really remember when that happened or how it happened. So at some point in that first 6 months, maybe, I remember trying to seek some answers for that same question and talking to a dear friend of mine who I would consider one of my mentors in the faith, and her basically telling me, you can't ask God those questions. Like, you can't. You just have to trust, And I was like, I was respectful to her because I really do respect her, but I was thinking, I need an answer, like, to my why me question. It's not good enough for me. Like,
Yeah,
this
it's not going to cut
rocks
it.
me to my core. I need an answer.
Yeah.
And so then when Caleb was transferred, he went from the trauma ICU unit to a step down unit to another unit, and then was finally transferred to an inpatient rehab unit for 3 months. And he had to learn how to walk again, like the whole 9 yards. And when he was in the inpatient rehab unit, people that I worked with donated leave days so that I was out of work for 4 months and I was completely paid. And I was with him during the day. And I wasn't even thinking about that why me question. And just out of nowhere, like in the middle of the day, Caleb said something to the effect of how grateful he was that I was there with him, and he didn't know what he would do without me. I had to help him. I mean, he had a broken right arm and a broken left leg, and he was in a C-collar. So he couldn't do he couldn't move, he couldn't do anything without help. And out of nowhere, that thought from that night in the emergency room came back to me. Why you? You're here now, aren't you? You're here when he needed you the most. Who else would be able to be here for your son that did survive? Who else would he be comfortable with helping him, not to be graphic, but go to the bathroom and, all those things that like are so personal. And who else would he be comfortable with doing that? And I remember telling Myron that night, I said, I don't know that I will know all of the answers to the why me, but I do feel like God gave me some. And that was because he knew that I still had another son that needed me. And I have actually since told people that, and Myron has told people, God's not intimidated by our questions. In fact, over and over in scripture, he actually welcomes them. He says, come and let us reason together. Let's sit down. Let's talk about this. And so some of my why me, I think, was answered. And then obviously, I don't know, there are other aspects of it. Maybe I won't know until eternity one day. But I think that he knew that I needed enough of an answer to be able to go forward in confidence and knowing that he does understand, and he is somehow still in control, even when it seems like he's not. And he is working it for the good of those that love him, even when we don't see it.
Last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How is Caleb now?
He is actually doing phenomenal. Most people that don't know would never realize how bad he was. He just barely has a limp. He's always been super modest, even before the accident. Him and Jacob were the kind of kids. We had a pool, and they would wear their swimsuits with a t-shirt in the pool. They just were always modest. Yeah. Which is another reason why it was really a big deal that I was able to be there in the rehab facility with him. But it took him about a year just to be able to walk again. And then with a traumatic brain injury, they tell you that it's your brain itself, the organ, takes about 2 years for it to stabilize to the point where they'll be able to tell what the long-term issues are. And we kind of joke around. He is actually getting married the 23rd of this month.
Oh, sweet.
Super exciting. And so his fiance already knows this, but we joke around. One of the long-term issues that he deals with the brain injury is some short-term memory issues and then some word finding issues. But the short-term memory, we've joked with him, oh, that's going to come in handy one day when you're married and your wife's like, didn't you take the trash out? And he'll be like, did you tell me to take the trash out? I don't remember you telling me to take the trash out. But the fiance already knows this. So she's like, don't even be trying it. Don't try it.
Yeah. She's going to like write it down. She'll have a whole system.
On his hand.
Yeah. The honey-do list will be strong in this relationship.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But he went back and got his teaching degree. He had his associates before the accident. He went back and got his teaching degree, and he's a full-time teacher in an elementary school now. And like I said, engaged to be married. And so doing well, thank God.
Yeah. I love it. God Prince, which is available now. You can go to Jenny Leavitt, JennyLeavitt.com. Jenny, we appreciate you so much for sharing your heart and your incredible story.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, if you enjoyed what you heard today, like, subscribe, and check out more of our YouTube videos.
Don't forget to follow us on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and faithstrongtoday.com.